Hi, I am Lisa Schwartzbaum from Entertainment Weekly, and it is a great pleasure to introduce Lynn Shelton. Lynn, the loveliness of this movie has so much to do with the ease with which the characters speak to each other. And I know that a big part of that is the improvisatory aspect of it. So if you could just start by explaining a little about how that worked.
So this instead of having a proper script where everything is written out and everybody just says the lines and we rehearse the lines, we had I had about 70 pages of dialogue written out, and some of the scenes were actually just sketched out. Like the very beginning scene, the memorial scene, for instance, is more of a sense of, I describe the kind of gathering that there was, and then say Al, this friend of Tom's, the dead brother, gets up and gives a very sort of sanctifying, almost canonizing story about Tom, and in very loving and very moving. But then a drunk Jack kind of rebuts in a way and says, well, you're not telling the whole truth, and tells a darker side. But by the end, you realize that he loves his brother and knows him more than anybody else at the party, and that's essentially what it was in the script. And then Mike Birbiglia, who plays Al, and Mark Duplass, who plays Jack, actually came up with their own material for and they gave me a variety of different stories to bring up. So that was some of the scenes. And then some of the scenes were really written out, like the scenes of the sisters in bed telling confessional, those intimacies in the dark. That was a little bit more structured, and I really did know the territory in a more specific way that I wanted them to follow. But even in those cases, even those instances, they were asked to not memorize the lines and not to hold too tightly to the words that I'd written, but instead to feel free to just go off them and glance at the scene, but really just have a sense of the shape of it in their head, and then make it, all in the quest to make it really feel like real people on screen having real conversations.
And as a result of that, in the course of, was there a lot of rehearsal then, or was it just sort of on-the-spot improv?
Yeah, with the improvisation, I find you want to shoot the rehearsal, essentially, because often the very first take is the best take, because there's a surprise that happens and there's genuine reaction when Rosemary's character, Hannah, tells the story of, remember that guy who asked you to trim your bush? That was a total surprise.
She made that up.
Well, she actually drew it from her past, not from like a friend of a friend. She heard this story and she found it from the recesses of her brain. I whispered to Rose, Hannah needs to embarrass Iris. She needs to come up with something to embarrass Iris. And Rose was like, I got something. She didn't tell me what it was. She didn't tell anybody. And so what you see, the reaction you see of Emily is she's actually genuinely blushing. And that's the kind of thing you can only get from improvisation. So we have 2 cameras, and we talk a lot to make sure everybody's on the same page about where the emotional trajectory of the scene needs to go, but we never rehearse.
Did anything happen in the course of doing this improv that changed the story for you because of what they brought up?
I don't think so. I mean, we're not making up the movie as we go along, because I definitely want to I'm too much of a control freak to go there. But I do have an outline in terms of structurally I know what the point of every scene is and how each scene is going to lead to the next and what the emotional map has to be. And then in terms of the beats, I want them to find their way there. But I can't think of an instance where it actually changed.
And as characters, did they surprise you with something that came out of them that even you, control freak, planning it on paper, wouldn't have expected?
Well, sure. I mean, here's the other aspect that I have to say. In order for this kind of work to be successful, I've found an incredible amount of backstory being developed really helps, because if they have a foundation, they really understand who they are and who they are to each other and what's happened right up to the moment of that scene, then when somebody lobs a line at them that they're not, expecting, what comes out in response is like second nature when they open their mouths, But if they don't really understand who they are, then they're going to flounder and it's going to feel false. So we have, as one of the actors said, backstory up the wazoo by the time we get to the set.
And which you discussed among the characters? I mean,
yeah,
the actors discussed?
Exactly. I developed it with the actors. The actors come on board really early on, and so it was about 8 or 9 months of every few weeks we would have a conversation. It wasn't like I was in a room with them, you know, workshopping this, but every few weeks we would have a conversation on the phone. We'd all get together. We were all in different cities. And I would send them the current version of the script, or scriptment, as I've been calling it. And then we would all talk about, spitball about, you know, various ways that their histories might enforce things that I would love, or reinforce things that I want to happen in the script. And then sometimes it changes the script. So that stuff happened before. But I really want them to be a part of that process because it engages them. It makes it feel like our movie instead of just my movie, and they're just coming on for work for hire. But also they're going to bring so much more. I mean, when you open up that process, it becomes so much richer, and it feels like I want the character to fit them like a hand into a glove. You know, I just want them it to be like a second skin.
Now, one thing that I didn't know, I read, was that Rosemary was a very late addition to the cast.
She was, and it was a lesson for me because I always thought that, well, I work so intensely with the actors and to fit these characters for them, and that you can't work with anybody but those actors. And this
so
was
you had
proof to
actually
me.
worked, there was another actress who
Right.
was there for a lot of this rehearsal.
Yes,
Okay.
for that whole development process, the 8 months of development, it was Emily Blunt, Mark Duplass, and Rachel Weisz, actually. And then 3 days before this production was to begin, we lost her due to unavoidable, you know, conflicts. It was just one of those tragedies. She was devastated. We were devastated. And
You
Rose
would have had two British sisters then.
Yeah, exactly. But what's funny is I'd already really fallen in love with this idea. There were half sisters, because what that means is that the point of origin for their relationship was one of contention, or one of friction, because the older sister's father is stolen away by the pregnancy of the younger sister. I loved that as being I thought that was a really rich thing to sort of start a relationship with. So they were always meant to have two different mothers and one American dad. And I actually have realized since that I think it was even better to have one American and one in English, because your ears are like pricked up waiting to hear the explanation for why they have different accents, and then you're sort of ready to, receive the fact that, oh, I see, they only had one parent that was the same, and they only spent summers together, and there's this age gap, and all that exposition, I hope, can kind of be absorbed a little bit more easily somehow. But anyway, Rose came in three days before and saved our production. And I was able to hand her this Bible that we had developed of the backstory and the characters and who they were. And then she still put her own stamp on it and somehow found instant chemistry with Emily. I mean, it was just amazing what they did.
That is amazing. I mean, again, what's so beautiful about the film is the naturalness of the relationship, and certainly those lying in bed scenes, which are just so beautiful and so sweet.
Yeah.
Now, also, you were all living together you kind of camped out on this island.
Yes. Yeah, Utopia. It was very intimate. The crew was, I think, 13. We had about 13 people, all told, and we were staying there was this piece of property with several houses, and so there was we call the picture house where we were shooting, and just a stone's throw away were a couple of other houses where we were living. There was the fraternity and the sorority, and then the special extra fancy house for the actresses, the movie star actresses, so they could get away anytime they wanted, which was great because they would just sort of stay up late at night and get their sister chemistry
so Mark,
going.
the kind of mumblecore guy, he just is off
Mark
doing
was
whatever
with
he
the
wants,
crew.
right?
He loved crashing with the male crew because he's buddies with all of them. This is second family for me. These crew members, and I know them. They've all worked with me.
You worked together on Hump Day also.
Yes,
and
and
with Mark also.
Yeah, with Mark as well. And then I had a couple films before that, and some of them have been with me from the very beginning. So they all know what I'm about, which is creating a very emotionally safe environment for a very actor-centered environment, so the performances can happen. And so everybody is really bonding. Even when we're on the off hours, we're not shooting, it's all feeding into the work because we're all sort of bonding and sometimes talking about what's going to happen. It all helps out for the next day on set. But yeah, wonderful home-cooked meals and campfires, and it was amazing.
Not that vegan stuff, though.
Well, that Hannah's for some of us, they're like half vegetarians, but Hannah's diet was somewhat semi-based on my own diet, which is really crazy. No, because I can't eat. I have all these allergies, so I have the weirdest diet. As Mark said to me the other day, he said, "Yeah, but face it, Lynn, if we put your real diet on screen, nobody would believe it."
So those pancakes really did taste like that.
That was they actually tasted. Mark said they actually tasted delicious, and so he really had to act that they tasted gross. But the idea was based on a debacle that I'd had once, where I discovered I couldn't eat eggs, and so I tried to replace them with flax seeds once, and it was like you couldn't open your mouth. I have since done it successfully. I don't want to completely malign flax seeds as an egg replacer, but you have to beware.
One question is. The other filmmakers, other movies that have influenced you, and this particular style of storytelling that you love.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of people who work with, obviously, who have worked over the years with improvisation now and then. Cassavetes, Altman are a couple that leap to mind. I mean, an early influence for me in general was Woody Allen. I was sort of raised on Woody Allen. My parents were big Woody Allen lovers, and in my teenage years, I was really influenced by Annie Hall and Manhattan and Hannah and Her Sisters and these movies that just the whole idea that you could base an entire movie on conversation, just like human, just face-to-face conversation, I think had an enormous influence on me. And then in terms of improvisation, I mean, recently, I have a lot of friends. Joe Swanberg, the Duplass brothers are a great example. These are all people who use improvisation in their work. And I feel like getting to know, hearing a little bit about how we all work as directors, everybody has a different approach to it, and it's very interesting. Like for me, when I turn on the cameras, we talk ad nauseum before we start the shoot. But then when I turn the cameras on, I like to just let them go, because I used to be an actor, and I know there's this sort of sacred space that happens when you start that work, and I don't want to burst into the bubble and say this now, So I try not to be a puppet master and just save my notes for in between. And occasionally I have to go in and say, I really need this line. But generally I like to give them their space.
Although this is a case where place also had a big part in this, much more than Hump Day. Certainly that silent stretches, that bike scene we just saw at the very end, which was just his gorgeous journey, ending with that great destruction of a bicycle.
Vision quest.
So this was a different thing for you then how did you end up in Puget Sound?
Well, so all of my films, I live in Seattle, and all of my films have been shot in that region in Washington State. And I actually have had my second feature, My Effortless Brilliance, takes place in the woods, in a cabin in the woods. And my first feature ends up in the woods as well. There's sort of characters are drawn back to the woods. So it's a little bit of a recurring theme that we didn't get in Hump Day, but in all my other works, there's this drawing back to nature. And what I wanted to give a real sense of place. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I really wanted to show it was an island. That was very important to me, because I feel like the fact that they were physically isolated from civilization, also meant that they could sort of emotionally, psychologically divorce themselves from civilization and allow them to do things and say things they might not otherwise, be able to. And I also liked the idea that right outside of the walls of this little cabin, where there's all this psychodrama going on with these little puny humans, is this huge bucolic world of nature, which somehow made it more poignant and kind of, bittersweet to me.
One of the in doing my research about this, I was interested to read you talking about My Summer of Love, which was a film that kind of launched Emily Blunt certainly here, and was that part of what drew her into the project? Was there some?
Yeah, it was. There was a connection. So I pitched it to Emily. I never thought I could get Emily to do this movie. I just thought, well, we actually had Rachel in place first, and initially I was thinking they'd just be sisters. So I wanted to have two British actresses, because I wanted them to not have to worry about doing an American accent while they were improvising. It just seemed like silliness. And so Emily was at the top of my list, and it turned out that her agent is a fan of Hump Day, which was my previous film, which was really helpful. But by the time I got on the phone with her, I described the Hump Day process and said, it'll be very similar to this, but we'll be off in some beautiful place, so it'll be a couple weeks. It'll feel sort of like film camp, I think, as opposed to one of the bigger budget movies you've done. But there's improvisation. I described that whole process to her, and I didn't know if she'd had any experience with it. And she said, I made this film years ago that was this little gem of a film. It's still one of my favorite films I've ever done, and it was very similar to that process. I never thought I would get to work that way again. And she said yes on that day, in that first conversation. And I went back and looked at My Summer of Love again, which is a wonderful film. You should see if you haven't. It was her very first film. She was like 17 or 18, and she is incredible. She plays the cello. So and she really does play the cello. It's incredible. But it was very inspiring to me personally because this film also has a real sense of place, and there are these sweeping wide shots. It's visually stunning. So it was very personally inspiring, and I actually, really used it as a point of reference for me and my DP.
Oh, well, I did love everything that you brought into that, and that nature and talk came together. And I want to thank you very much for coming for this conversation. Thank
Thanks,
you all for
Lisa.
coming.
Thank you so much for coming. And if I could just say one more thing, which is, this is a really small film in an enormous market, filled with large budget movies with large amounts of cash to throw around for marketing. And if you did enjoy it, please tell your friends, because especially this opening weekend, it'll really make a big, big difference for us. So I thank you so much for coming.